Welcome to Case Vault, where every case has a crack, a contradiction, a missed clue, a detail that should not be there. Today we're looking at a killer who hid for 30 years, then asked the police one careful question, and the one thing on a floppy disk that the man closest to it never noticed. For 30 years, BTK wrote to Wichita police and stayed faceless. Then he asked the people hunting him for advice. Could a floppy disk trace him back to a computer? Police answered through the newspaper, "Rex, it will be okay." That answer was a lie. He mailed the disk. A deleted file still carried Dennis and the church that led to Dennis Rader. Start with who he was and what he did, because the size of it matters. Between 1974 and 1991, 10 people were murdered in and around Wichita. One killer, 17 years. Most of them were strangled. Most were attacked inside their own homes, in the middle of an ordinary day, behind a door they thought was locked. The first were a family of 4, killed in their own house on a winter morning, the parents and 2 of their children. The youngest victims over the years were young. The oldest was in her 60s. These were neighbors, people doing the dishes, getting ready for school, answering a knock at the door on a normal afternoon. That is the human weight sitting under all of this, and it never goes away. The killer named himself. In letters to the police and the press, he signed them BTK. It stood for bind, torture, kill. That was the part that frightened a whole city. He wasn't hiding from the attention. He wanted the credit. He wanted them to know he was still out there. He sent letters describing his crimes. He gave himself the nickname and asked the media to use it. He treated murder like a brand he was building, and he wanted it to last. For years, Wichita lived with it. People bolted their doors and watched their neighbors. The fear was that he could be anyone, and he was counting on that. And here is the thing nobody could see. The man writing those letters looked like the last person on earth you'd suspect. He was a married father with 2 kids. He led a scout group for boys. He was president of the council at his church. He even wore a uniform for work. He was a code enforcement officer for his town, the man who knocked on doors about long grass and stray dogs. A church-going neighbor with a clipboard and a city badge, the kind of man you'd ask to keep an eye on your house. That was the cover, and for a very long time it held. Then the letters stopped. Through the late 80s and into the 90s, BTK went quiet. Years went by with nothing new. No letters, no fresh attacks tied to him. To a lot of people, the case felt cold, maybe even finished. Maybe he was dead. Maybe he had moved away. Maybe he had simply stopped. Nobody knew, because nobody knew who he was. What finally brought him back wasn't a detective or a tip or a break in the evidence. It was a newspaper story. In 2004, a Wichita paper ran a piece marking 30 years since the killings began. 30 years, and still no name, still no arrest. For almost everyone reading it, that was history. A cold case looked back on. For him, it landed as something else, a slight. The world was forgetting him. The credit he had killed for was fading. And for a man like that, being forgotten was unbearable. So he started writing again. Letters, postcards, packages, mailed to the newspaper and the local television stations. He sent a photocopy of a murdered woman's stolen driver's license. He sent details from the crime scenes that only the killer could possibly know. He even started numbering his messages. It was proof of life from a monster the city had hoped was gone. BTK was back, and this time he could not stop talking, which is exactly what they needed. But coming back into the open is dangerous, and part of him knew it. The world had changed while he was silent. In the 70s, he wrote by hand and on typewriters. A typed page is hard to trace. Now there were home computers everywhere, and he wasn't sure what a computer might quietly record about him. He needed to know if it was safe. So he did the thing that, looking back, decided the entire case. He asked the police for help. In one of his messages, he asked them, in writing, whether he could be traced if he sent his words on a floppy disk. His words were close to this. Can I communicate with a floppy and not be traced to a computer? Be honest. Be honest. Read that again. The man who had bound and strangled 10 people was asking the police to be straight with him, as if they owed him fairness. He even set up a way for them to answer. If a floppy was safe, the police should run a small ad in the paper. The ad should read, Rex, it will be okay. 3 words in a newspaper meant for one reader, a yes or no in code. In a minute, we get to what the police did with that question, and the crack that broke the case wide open. If you like a case where one small detail decides everything, take a second and subscribe. It genuinely helps. Now put yourself in the police chair. A serial killer is asking you, in writing, whether a floppy disk is safe. The honest answer is no. A floppy disk is not safe at all. A computer leaves marks on a file. It can record who made it and where. The homicide unit, led by a lieutenant named Ken Landwehr, understood that better than he did. So they made a cold, deliberate choice. They ran the ad. In the Wichita paper on the day it mattered, the message appeared exactly as he had asked. Rex, it will be okay. It was a lie, and they knew it was a lie. It was a trap, written in 3 words and printed for an audience of 1. They were betting on the one thing that had always driven him, his need to be seen, his belief that he was smarter than all of them put together. It was a gamble. If he saw through it, he might go quiet again for another 10 years, but they ran it anyway. He read the ad, and he believed it. The police had told him a floppy was safe, so to him, a floppy was safe. In February of 2005, a television station in Wichita received a package from him. Inside was a purple floppy disk. On it, a file with instructions for the detectives written like he was running the conversation. He believed the disk was clean. He believed the ad had told him the truth. He had no idea what he was actually mailing them. Because a disk holds more than the file you can see on it. It also holds the files you think you deleted, and it holds their marks. Every document a computer makes can quietly carry a record of who made it. A name typed in once, a place it was saved. The file remembers even when you don't. And he had handed that disk to the one group of people in Kansas most determined to read every last byte of it. And this is where the case cracks open. On that disk was a document he had written and then deleted. But deleting a file does not wipe everything it knows. Investigators recovered it, and the deleted file still remembered who had made it. It carried a first name, Dennis. And it carried one more thing, a place. The file was tied to a church, Christ Lutheran Church. A first name and a church on its own, that's almost nothing. There are 1,000 men named Dennis at 1,000 churches. So they looked up the church, they found its website, and they read the page that listed the people who ran it. There, listed as president of the church council, was a full name, Dennis Rader. Sit with that for a second. For 30 years, the most hunted man in Kansas had no face and no name. The entire state had been looking for a ghost. And he gave himself away on a disk he was told was safe. A file he thought he had deleted, pointed straight at a first name in a church. The church's own website finished the job. The ghost suddenly had a name, a town, and a seat on a church council in Park City. There were other clues in his earlier messages that pointed the same way once they knew his name, but it was the floppy that put it there to read. The lie drew out the disk. The disk named Dennis. And Dennis led them to a real man they could finally put a face to. But a name on a disk is not the same as proof of murder. A defense lawyer would tear that apart. They had to be certain before they moved on him. They couldn't just walk up to Dennis Rader and ask for a DNA sample. That would warn him they were close, and he might run. So they took a quieter path. They didn't need his DNA directly. They could use the DNA of someone related to him. His adult daughter had a medical sample on file at a clinic from a routine visit years before. She had no idea any of this was happening. By court order, and without her knowledge, a lab compared her DNA against evidence saved from the crime scenes. She had done nothing wrong. She was an innocent person who happened to share his blood, pulled into this without a say. Her DNA came back as a near match to the killer. Close relatives share patterns in their DNA. Hers said the killer was family, not her, but someone very close to her by blood. Think about how the two pieces fit. The man on the disc was the man at the crime scenes. The deleted file had named him. The DNA closed the loop. There was no doubt left to argue. On February 25, 2005, they arrested him near his home in Park City. Dennis Rader was 59 years old, a husband, a father, a churchman with a city badge, and for 30 years, BTK. The town's quiet code enforcement officer, the man from the church newsletter, the neighbor people waved to, all of it, the same man. When they told him how they'd found him, he could hardly believe it. He had trusted the signal. He had trusted that the police were being honest. There is one moment that says everything. Rader turned to Landwehr, the man who had run the ad, and asked him a question. "How come you lied to me?" And Landwehr gave him the only answer there was. "Because I was trying to catch you." That June, Rader pleaded guilty. In court, he described the killings in a flat, careful voice, one after another, the same calm he'd used to write the letters. It was the voice of a man reading from a list. The same precision he had used to hide for 30 years was right there in the room. In August of 2005, he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, a minimum of 175 years before he could even ask for parole. There was no death penalty for him to face. Kansas had none in force when the crimes were committed, so life was the most the court could give. If this is the kind of case you like, where one detail no one expected undoes 30 years of hiding, then subscribe. You'll want to be here for the next one. Step back and look at the whole thing. For 3 decades, Dennis Rader controlled this story. He chose when to write. He chose what the police got to see and what they didn't. He hid behind an ordinary life so well that the people right next to him never knew. His family, his church, the patrols, none of them saw it. What undid him wasn't a witness, or a confession, or a guilty conscience. It was one careful question he asked, and one lie he chose to believe. And it was a detail he never thought about. He worried about being traced through a computer. He never imagined the file itself would carry his name. He had spent years learning what evidence to leave behind and what to take away. But you cannot clean up a mark you don't know exists. The lie drew out the disc. The disc named him, and the DNA made it certain. He asked if the disc could name him. They told him no. The disc said Dennis, and a church, and a council seat with his name on it. He spent 30 years making sure no one could trace him. In the end, he put the answer in an envelope and mailed it to them himself. A killer who hid for 30 years was caught by a disc he was told to trust. That's the case. If you see things other people miss, hit subscribe. Case Vault drops a new one twice a week, and the next crack is sharper than this one.